Alright guys, let's take a look at our homework today. We want to solve the equation using the quadratic formula. So we're going to use negative b plus and minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c. All of that will be divided by 2a. And what we're going to do is take the first, the second, and the third coefficient or constant and substitute them in. So here a is 1, b is 4, and c is negative 8. And that's what we substitute into our formula. So negative 4 plus and minus the square root of 4 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 8. All of that will be divided by 2 times 1. Okay. So we've got negative 4 plus and minus. 4 times 4 is 16, and then 4 times 8 is 32. Negative times a negative is a positive. So this is 16 plus 32, which equals 48. The factors of 48 are 16 and 3. That's a good one for me because I can take the square root of 16. Square root of 16 is 4, because 4 times 4 is 16. And then I'm just left with that square root of 3. Okay, and then we'll divide by 2. So each of these numbers needs to get divided by 2. This 4 here, this will be negative 2, and then plus or minus, and then 4 divided by 2 is 2. Square roots of 3. We're going to find that answer right over here. It is letter S. So we'll do 1 is S. Alright. Let's tackle number 2. So we go to negative b, but we don't have a b here, so that's going to be 0 plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, all divided by 2a. Okay, so over here we have 0 plus or minus 0, all of that goes away, and we just have plus or minus, and then 4 times 10 is 40. 40 times 2 is 80. So we have 80, and then the square root of 80 divided by 2 times 10, which is 20. And I'm going to factor 80 into 16 and 5. 16 times 5 is 80. The square root of 16 is a perfect square, so the square root of 16 is just 4. And then we're left over with the square root of 5, like that. Plus or minus 4 square roots of 5 divided by 20. And then we can simplify this. 4 will go away because 20 divided by 4 is just 5. So plus or minus the square root of 5 divided by 5. We'll simplify down. And that's going to be option O over here. Alright, so we've got S and O at the bottom. Let's move on to number 3. Number 3, again, we've got A is 2, B is 1, and C is negative 8. So we'll substitute into our formula, negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all over 2a. So negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, all divided by 2a. Okay. So 4 times 2 is 8, 8 times 8 is 64, and negative times negative is positive. So this is positive 64, and then we have a 1 here, so plus 1. So all of this underneath the radical is negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 65 divided by 4. And that is, over here, option F. Bottom. Okay. Number 4, we're going to do A is negative 1, B is 3, C is 5. So negative B plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4 times A times C. Notice every time if the number is negative, I bring it in here, I bring that sign with me. All divided by 2A when I substitute. 3 squared is 9. And then 4 times 5 is 20. A negative times a negative is a positive. So this is positive 20. Underneath the radical, you've got positive 29. Negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 29. And then 2 times negative 1 is negative 2. And that is going to be A, right over here, A. Number 5, we need to get this 2 over here so that our equation equals 0. 4x squared minus 5x plus 2, where A is 4, B is negative 5, and C is 2. Let's go ahead and substitute in. Negative b, remember that negative sign is going to follow you in, so it's going to be a negative 5 plus or minus the square roots of negative b squared minus 4 times a times c, and then all divided by 2a. Okay, so 4 times 4 is 16, 16 times 2 is 32, that's negative 32. 5 times 5 is 25, and negative 5 times negative 5 is still a positive 25. So 25 minus 32 is actually negative 7 here. This is negative 7 under the radical. So negative 5 and negative 5, that's positive 5 plus or minus. We have a negative 7 underneath the radical, and then 2 times 4 is 8. Now you can see right here in option S that they made a mistake here. It says 5 plus or minus the square root of 7 divided by 8, and we know that's not true. Because anytime you have a negative underneath the radical, you need to simplify that. And we can simplify this to 5 plus or minus I times the square root of 7 divided by 8. See, the move here is that this negative sign will come out and be an I on the outside. Alright. So that being the case, we're going to change this over here to an I, and then this would be option S. So S-O-F-A, and then S down here. Number 6, we need to add 2x to both sides, so this equation equals 0. X squared plus 2x plus 1. Where A equals 1, B equals 2, and C equals 1. We're going to substitute this into the formula as well. Alright, so negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 2 squared minus 4 times 1, all divided by 2 times 1. Okay, so 2 squared is 4, and then 4 times 1 is just 4. 4 minus 4 is 0. Good news for us, that means this whole thing cancels out to 0, and we're left just with negative 2 divided by 2, okay, because this is all 0. So negative 2 plus or minus 0 divided by 2, and this means that x equals negative 1. Alright, that is option O down here. So we go down to the bottom, okay, and let's try number 7. A is negative 4, B is 6, and C is negative 2. When we substitute into that, we're going to get negative, B is 6, C is negative 2. Negative B plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4 times A times C, all divided by 2A. Okay, so let's talk about this inside of here. 6 times 6 is 36. And then we have 4 times 4, which is 16. 16 times 2, which is 32. So a negative times a negative is a positive. A positive times a negative, now it turns back negative. 36 minus 32 is 4. So what we're saying here is all of this is just the square root of 4. Well, what's the square root of 4? That's 2. So we have negative 6 plus or minus 2 divided by, and then 2 times negative 4 is negative 8. Negative 6 plus 2 divided by negative 8, and negative 6 minus 2 divided by negative 8. This is negative 8 divided by negative 8, that equals positive 1. And negative 6 plus 2 is negative 4. Negative 4 divided by negative 8 is positive 1/2. This is option O at the bottom. G, excuse me, G right down here. Okay. So this is G, and we'll write that there. 8, we need to add 2 so that my equation equals 0. Remember, what I'm doing here is I am factoring to find a 0. Okay, so that's why my equation equals 0, and that's why I'm using the quadratic formula, because I want to factor this. So A is 3, B is -1, C is +2. Okay. So negative B, again here you see a double negative, plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4 times A times C, all divided by 2A. Okay. So this is 1 plus or minus, because negative times negative is a positive. And then 1 squared is 1. 4 times 3 is 12. 12 times 2 is 24. So 1 minus 24, that's going to give us a minus 23 underneath the radical. Alright, minus 23. And then divided by 6. Again, remember, anytime you see a negative underneath the radical, all that's going to happen is you're going to push it out of the radical as an I, and then it will be divided by 6. This is down here, 1 plus or minus I squared, so 23 divided by 6, so O. Like that. And then minus 7 here, so we have negative x squared plus 2x minus 7 equals 0. So A is -1, B is 2, and C is -7. When you substitute in your formula, you get -2 plus or minus the square root. 2 squared minus 4 times -1 times -7. Divide that by 2 times -1. Again, let's talk about underneath the radical. Remember in class we talked about this being called the discriminant, and it helps you determine whether or not you have imaginary numbers. 2 times 2 is 4. 4 times 1 is 4, so 4 times 7 is 28. Negative times a negative is a positive. So we have positive times will be a negative, so -28. Good. 4 minus 28 is -24. That's what's underneath the radical. So -2 plus or minus the square root of -24 divided by -2. Let's keep going and see if we can simplify any of this. So we'll take this negative and push it out of the radical. -2 plus or minus I square root of 24 divided by -2. We'll factor 24 into 4 and 6. I'm choosing 4 and 6 because 4 is a perfect square, just like earlier we had 16. So 4 is a perfect square. The square root of 4 is just 2, and the square root of 6 is just the square root of 6, so that's going to stay. So we have 2 square roots of 6 here. -2 plus or minus 2i square roots of 6 divided by -2. Okay. So a -2 divided by a -2 here, right? You're going to get, that's your +1. And then your 2 here will also divide out, right? So all of this will divide out and cancel. 2 divided by 2 is 1, 2 divided by 2 is 1. So you're done. So you have 1 plus or minus 1i square roots of 6. And that's your final answer for number 9. And that's O over here up at the top. Okay, number 10, we're going to use a little shortcut here. We're going to subtract x from both sides. Remember, this equals 0. And we're going to use traditional factoring on this. We're going to factor out an x, and then we have x minus 1. Let's make sure we did this right. X times x is x squared. X times -1 is -1x. So we see the same thing here. And now I have my two factors. The first factor is right here. We have x equals 0. The next factor says x minus 1 equals 0. So on this one, we're going to add 1 to both sides, and we get x equals 1. X equals 0, and x equals 1. This is the very last letter we haven't chosen yet. This is letter